Today's execution methods and torture have nothing on the ancient world. Read about 10 blood-curdling ways people were put to death. Throughout the centuries, the pages of history have sung about gruesome tales of torture, human ruthlessness, and the sadistic pleasure both individuals and groups of people derived from seeing others in excruciating agony. Here are the top 10 most brutal ways people were executed in the ancient world. Number 10. Crucifixion, from the ancient world to the modern. This was practiced both in the ancient world and as recently as the 20th century. It was first introduced by the Assyrians and Babylonians, followed by the Persians, Alexander the Great, and the Phoenicians, who initiated it in Rome in the 3rd century BC. Crucifixion involved being tied or nailed to a wooden beam, or cross. Nails were pierced through the bones below the wrists to bear the weight of the person. It was a brilliant placement because no major blood vessels were hit, only the median nerve, which would cause the fingers to seize and the hands to flex down in an excruciating contracture. The feet were nailed to the vertical part of the cross, and once the legs weakened, the arms had to hold up the body, resulting in the shoulders being pulled from their sockets. Number 9. Rat torture, eaten alive. As happy as the above dancing rats are, rat torture is right up there when it comes to one of the worst ways to go. The thing about rats is that they eat through anything. Thus, it comes as no great surprise that humans made a torture device out of them in the ancient world. Typically, a rat was placed inside a small cage positioned against the victim's abdomen. The cage was heated from the outside, either by a candle, flaming stick, or hot coals, causing the rat to become agitated. So, how could it escape? By clawing its way into the only available soft surface, human skin. Quite quickly, the rat would gnaw its way into the victim's bowels, eliciting unbearable agony in the process. Number 8. The rack, stretching the body. It involved a table, usually wooden, with axles and levers at both ends. One or several torturers would then slowly push the levers, causing the axles to rotate and produce tension in the chains. This caused the straps to dig into the prisoner's skin and gradually stretch their body outwards. The internal physical turmoil that one would have suffered is hard to swallow. Vertebrae expanded, joints, muscles, and tendons gave way, posture changed, the ribcage pressurized the lungs, bones shattered, nerve endings became exposed. The pain would be near unimaginable. As a bonus for the especially tough, they were placed on spiked axles that stripped their back of their flesh. Number 7. Keelhauling, dragged under. The term comes from the Dutch word keelhalen, meaning to drag along the keel, which is precisely what this torture method did. The sailor was stripped, tied, and suspended by a rope from the ship's mast, with weights or chains attached to their legs. The rope was looped beneath the ship, and once the sailor was released, they were dragged under the keel. The fatality rate was practically 100%. Number 6. The wheel, a severe bashing. The wheel, also known as the execution wheel, breaking wheel, or Catherine wheel. This commonly used ruthless contraption in the ancient world was reserved for public executions. There are variations on the practice, but generally, the prisoner was tied to a large, wooden, spoked wheel. The goal was not to kill them but severely mutilate them, with the executioner starting with breaking the leg bones and then working their way up. They would do this via an iron bar, beating the victim to near death, crushing all their bones, and bludgeoning them. Once finished, the now ghastly maimed prisoner would be repositioned on the wheel so that their heels came together at the back of their neck. Number 5. Impalement, pierced straight through. It involved impaling the victim with a long, sharp, and often greased stake for either capital punishment, to subdue revolts, to reprimand defectors, or wipe out military insubordination in war. This method was done in 2 ways, longitudinal or transversal. For longitudinal, the person was positioned above the spike, which was inserted partway up their rear privates. As gravity took hold, the spike would run them through, avoiding major organs and exiting through the skin of their shoulder or neck. A person could survive this for several days. For transversal, the stake was instead pierced through the torso, either from front to back or vice versa. Number 4. Blood eagle, giving the victim wings. Although it is highly debated whether this torture method was real or just a literary invention, either way, a rather disturbed mind concocted it. The blood eagle ritual was first mentioned in late skaldic poetry. The victim would lie in a prone position and be kept alive as their back was sliced open, their ribs were detached from their spine, and their lungs pulled through the opening to form a pair of bloody wings. It is hard to imagine one staying conscious long enough for this to be completed. Nevertheless, if the Viking sagas are to be trusted, this technique has truly earned its spot as one of the most brutal, painful, and downright terrifying ways to die. Number 3. Molten gold, scorched from the inside. This was potentially practiced more often than documented, especially on both sides of the Atlantic Oceans, by the Romans and the Spanish Inquisition. The technique is self-explanatory. The victim would be restrained, and their mouth forced open as heated gold was poured down their throat. The result would be severe damage to distal organs and the blistering of the lungs, ultimately leading to immediate death. Number 2. Flaying, skinned alive. Flaying, or skinning, was perhaps the most painful of all ancient world execution methods because of its slow process. The victim was first stripped, and their hands and feet bound to stop any movement. After this, the executioner would begin peeling away the individual's skin with a sharp blade, often starting with the head, as this area would inflict the most suffering due to the victim still being conscious. In some instances, parts of the person's body were even boiled to make the skin softer and easier to remove. There were a few ways one could die from flaying: shock, blood or fluid loss, hypothermia, or infection. The time of death could also be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. Number 1. The Roman candle, the ancient world's ultimate torture method. Whether it is the execution style itself or the executioner who ordered it, this is bone-chilling on several fronts. History is filled with ruthless and psychopathic figures, and the Roman ruler, Nero, is one of them. He hated Christians so much that he used them as human candles, or torches, for his garden parties. First, the victims were tied and nailed to tall stakes. Then, the flammable liquid was poured over them before they were set alight. The fire started at the feet to prolong their suffering. If you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe.